Tonight, before sleep gently finds you, let me share 4 quiet stories. Stories that have traveled across generations, carrying simple wisdom about the human mind. These stories have helped many people understand something important, that peace is not something we must search for far away. Sometimes, peace is already waiting quietly inside us. In tonight's journey, we will hear 4 gentle stories. A humble farmer who discovers calm through his breath. A drifting boat that reveals the true nature of anger. A young boy who learns about the 2 wolves living inside every heart. And a powerful king who finds wisdom hidden inside a simple ring. But our journey begins with the first story.
A story about a man who lived a quiet life, yet whose mind could never truly rest. This first story is called The Peaceful Path of the Farmer. Long ago, in a quiet village near a forest, there lived a humble farmer named Ananda, and his story begins like this. Ananda lived a very simple life. Every morning, before the sun rose above the hills, he would walk slowly to a small rice field. The air was cool, and the earth still carried the scent of night rain.
He worked quietly, planting rice, watering the soil, listening to birds singing in the distance. But inside his heart, something felt restless. Even though his life was peaceful, his mind was often full of worry. He worried about the harvest, he worried about money, he worried about the future. And sometimes he wondered, why does my mind never feel truly calm?
One evening, as the sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains, Ananda saw a traveling monk walking along the dusty road. The monk moved slowly, step by step, with a gentle smile and peaceful eyes. Ananda invited the monk to rest in his small home. He offered a bowl of rice and warm tea. The monk accepted with gratitude. After dinner, they sat quietly outside, watching the moon rise into the night sky. Finally, Ananda asked softly, "Dear monk, why does my mind feel so restless even when my life is simple?" The monk looked at the calm moon above. Then he spoke slowly. "My friend, the mind is like water in a lake. When the wind blows strongly, the surface becomes full of waves. But when the wind becomes quiet, the water becomes clear again." Ananda listened carefully. "So how can the wind stop?" he asked. The monk smiled gently. "By learning to watch the mind without chasing every thought. Thoughts will come and thoughts will go, just like clouds moving across the sky." That night, the monk showed Ananda a very simple practice. "Sit quietly," he said. "Close your eyes. Breathe in slowly and breathe out gently. When a thought appears, do not fight it. Simply notice it and let it pass." Ananda tried. At first, his mind jumped everywhere, thinking about the farm, thinking about tomorrow, thinking about many small worries. But slowly, with each gentle breath, his mind began to soften, like waves becoming calm again. The monk stayed in the village for several days. Every evening, Ananda practiced sitting quietly, watching his breath, watching his thoughts. Little by little, something beautiful happened. His mind became lighter, his worries became smaller, and he discovered something important. Peace was not somewhere far away. Peace had always been inside him, waiting to be noticed. One morning, the monk prepared to continue his journey. Ananda walked with him to the edge of the village. "Thank you," Ananda said. "You have given me something very precious." The monk smiled kindly. "I gave you nothing new.
I only helped you see what was already in your heart.
Then he added one final teaching. Whenever life feels heavy, return to your breath. Peace will always be there. That evening, Ananda returned to his rice field. The wind moved softly across the water. The sky slowly turned dark. And for the first time in many years, his heart felt completely calm, just like the quiet lake under the gentle moon. Now, as this peaceful story comes to an end, allow your body to relax even more. Let your thoughts drift away like clouds in the night sky. Breathe slowly and gently fall into a deep, peaceful sleep. And so, Ananda returned to his quiet rice field, carrying a new understanding inside his heart. He had discovered that peace does not come from controlling the world, but from gently observing the mind. Yet life often brings unexpected moments that test our patience. Sometimes anger rises suddenly, even when everything around us seems calm. Our next story shows how easily this can happen. It is a simple story, but one that has been shared by many teachers of wisdom. It is called The Empty Boat. There once lived a man who loved only one thing in this busy world: silence. Not the silence of empty rooms or the silence of the night after a storm, but the deep, living silence of a river. Every afternoon, when the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the man would carry his small wooden boat down to the water. The river he loved was wide but calm, its surface often so smooth that the sky seemed to rest gently upon it. Out there, drifting between the golden reflections of the setting sun, the man felt something rare, a kind of peace that was impossible to find anywhere else. No crowds, no arguments, no noise of the world, only the sound of water softly touching the sides of his boat. Row, pause, drift. For him, these quiet moments were not just leisure. They were a refuge, a place where the weight of everyday life slowly dissolved into the flowing current.
On one particular evening, the sky glowed with deep shades of orange and gold. The air was still, the river almost perfectly calm. It was the kind of evening that seemed made for reflection. The man pushed his boat gently away from the shore and began rowing toward the middle of the river, hoping to enjoy another peaceful journey alone with the fading light of day. For a while, everything was exactly as he loved it. The river was silent, the sky was glowing, and the world felt perfectly balanced. But then, something unexpected appeared in the distance. As he drifted quietly, the man noticed another boat floating slowly toward him. At first, he paid little attention. After all, the river was large enough for many boats. But as the seconds passed, something strange became clear.
The other boat was not changing direction. It was moving straight toward him, slowly, silently, unstoppably. And the distance between the two boats was shrinking. The man narrowed his eyes and looked more carefully toward the approaching boat. It drifted quietly across the water, pushed gently by the slow current of the river. At first, he assumed someone must be inside it, perhaps another fisherman enjoying the evening, or a traveler crossing the river before nightfall. So he called out politely, "Hey there, be careful!" His voice carried across the calm water. But the other boat did not respond. It continued drifting toward him, slowly and steadily, without changing course. The man frowned. Perhaps the other person simply hadn't heard him. The river sometimes swallowed sound in strange ways, especially in the quiet of the evening.
So he called again, this time louder. "Watch out! You're heading straight toward me!" Still, nothing. The boat kept coming. The distance between them grew shorter. The man's peaceful mood began to fade. A ripple of irritation passed through him. Why wasn't the other person steering the boat? Were they asleep, careless, or worse, ignoring him completely? Now the man's voice sharpened. "Hey, turn your boat!" His call atone across the water. But the drifting boat continued forward exactly the same way, as if his words meant absolutely nothing. The peaceful river that moments ago felt so calming now seemed strangely tense. The man gripped his oars harder, his jaw tightened. Inside him, frustration began to grow. What kind of fool would let their boat drift directly into someone else like this? Didn't they see him? Didn't they care?
Now, anger replaced the calm he had enjoyed only moments before. He stood slightly in his boat and shouted across the water, "Move your boat! You're going to crash into me!" But the other boat kept drifting, silently, steadily, closer, closer, closer. And in that moment, the man was certain that whoever sat inside that boat was being completely irresponsible. His heart began to pound with anger. The calm river had turned into a stage for his rising frustration. He prepared himself to confront the stranger the moment their boats collided. He shouted one final time, "Turn your boat! Are you blind?" But the river answered with silence. Then, bump. The two boats collided. Immediately, the man turned toward the other boat, ready to shout.
But when he looked closely, he froze. There was no one there. No careless fisherman, no stubborn traveler, no rude stranger ignoring his warnings. The boat was completely empty. It was nothing more than a small wooden boat that had come loose somewhere upstream, drifting quietly along the river without direction, without intention, without awareness. For a moment, the man simply stared. His anger, which had burned so fiercely only seconds before, suddenly had nowhere to go. Who could he shout at? Who could he blame? Who could he argue with? There was no one, just an empty boat floating on the river. And in that quiet realization, something strange happened. The anger inside him disappeared almost instantly.
It was as if someone had blown out a candle inside his chest. The man slowly sat down again in his boat, feeling an unexpected wave of embarrassment wash over him. Just moments earlier, he had been ready to fight, ready to accuse, ready to shout. And yet, all of that anger had been directed at something that had no intention at all. Only a drifting boat, only a piece of wood carried by the current. The river became quiet again, and now the silence felt different. Not tense, not frustrating, but thoughtful. For a long moment, the man said nothing. He simply sat in his boat, looking at the empty vessel that had drifted into him. The two boats rocked gently on the surface of the river, moving softly with the current, as if nothing important had happened at all.
Yet, inside his mind, something profound had just changed. Only seconds earlier, he had been filled with anger. His heart had been racing, his voice had been loud, his thoughts had been sharp and accusing. He had been completely certain that someone in that other boat was careless, rude, even disrespectful. But now, staring at the empty boat beside him, the man suddenly saw the truth. There had never been anyone to blame. No one had insulted him. No one had tried to harm him. The river had simply carried a boat downstream, just as rivers always do. Slowly, the man let out a deep breath. A quiet smile appeared on his face, not because the situation was funny, but because it revealed something about himself that he had never noticed before.
All that anger, all those harsh words, they had come entirely from his own mind. The boat had done nothing. It had no intention, no awareness, no ego. It was simply empty. And yet, his reaction had been full of emotion. The man leaned back slightly and looked at the fading sun over the river. Perhaps many things in life are like that empty boat. Sometimes people say things that hurt us. Sometimes situations appear unfair. But often, what causes our suffering is not the event itself. It is the story we immediately create in our minds. If we can learn to see the empty boats in our lives, if we can pause before reacting, then many storms inside our hearts might never begin at all. The man picked up his oars and slowly rowed toward the glowing horizon.
The man watched the empty boat drift quietly down the river, and in that silent moment, his anger disappeared. From that day forward, whenever frustration appeared in his heart, he remembered the lesson of the empty boat. But anger is not something that only adults struggle with. Even children sometimes feel it rise suddenly, like a fire they cannot control. And that is exactly what happened to a young boy in our next story. A story about emotions, choices, and the quiet battle that lives inside every human heart. This story is called The Two Wolves. In a quiet village surrounded by forests and mountains, there lived a young boy who often struggled with his emotions. Most of the time, he was kind and curious. He loved to explore the woods, climb rocks by the river, and listen to the stories told by the elders in the village square. But there was one problem the boy could never seem to control: his anger. Sometimes it appeared suddenly, a small disagreement with a friend, a game that didn't go his way, a careless word from someone else, and the boy would feel something burning inside his chest. His face would turn red, his voice would grow loud, and harsh words would escape his mouth like arrows. Afterward, when the anger faded, regret always followed. He would sit alone, staring at the ground, wishing he could take those words back. One evening, after another argument with his friends, the boy walked slowly to the small wooden house where his grandfather lived. The old man was known throughout the village as a wise and gentle soul. People often visited him when they needed advice. When the boy arrived, he found his grandfather sitting outside, watching the sun slowly disappear behind the mountains. The sky was painted with deep shades of gold and violet. The old man noticed the sadness in the boy's eyes. Without saying anything at first, he simply patted the wooden bench beside him. The boy sat down quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of evening wind moving through the trees filled the silence. Finally, the grandfather turned to him and asked softly, "Tell me, what troubles your heart today?"
The boy stared down at the ground. "I keep getting angry," he admitted quietly. "Sometimes I don't even know why. It just happens. And when it does, I say things I don't mean." The grandfather listened patiently. He did not judge. Instead, he looked out toward the darkening forest, as if he were remembering something from a long time ago. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "My child," the old man said gently, "inside every human heart, there is a battle happening." The boy looked up, confused. "A battle?" The grandfather nodded. "Yes, a battle between two wolves. One wolf is dark and fierce. It is filled with anger, jealousy, pride, greed, resentment, and fear. This wolf whispers cruel thoughts and feeds on our worst emotions.
The evening wind rustled through the trees as he spoke. "And the other wolf?" the boy asked softly.
The grandfather smiled faintly. "The other wolf is peaceful," he said. "It carries kindness, patience, love, humility, compassion, and hope. This wolf wants harmony and peace." The boy sat quietly, thinking about the two wolves living inside the same heart. The old man continued, his voice steady. "These two wolves fight each other every day inside every person." The boy's eyes widened slightly. "Even inside me?" The grandfather chuckled. "Yes, inside you, inside me, inside everyone." The boy leaned forward, fascinated. He imagined two powerful wolves circling each other in the darkness of the forest, claws ready, eyes glowing, locked in an endless struggle. Then he asked the question that suddenly filled his mind. If the wolves are always fighting, which wolf wins? The old man looked at him carefully, and the sky turned darker as the first stars appeared.
"Hopefully," the grandfather spoke slowly, "the wolf that wins is the one you feed." The boy blinked in surprise. "The one I feed?" The grandfather nodded. "Yes, every thought you choose, every word you speak, every action you take, it is like giving food to one of the wolves. When you hold on to anger or jealousy, the dark wolf becomes stronger. But when you choose patience and kindness, you feed the peaceful wolf." The boy looked at his hands, remembering his own anger. "So every time I get angry, I am feeding the dark wolf?" The grandfather placed a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, but that does not make you a bad person. It only means you are human. The battle never truly ends, but you choose which wolf you will feed each day." The boy sat silently, realizing that his response to anger was a choice. Under the stars, he felt something change inside. One wolf fierce and restless, its eyes burning with anger. The other calm and steady, its presence quiet but strong. For the first time, the boy understood that both wolves lived inside him. And suddenly, he remembered something that had happened earlier that day. A friend had accidentally broken his small wooden toy. Without thinking, the boy had shouted at him, accusing him of doing it on purpose. His friend had tried to explain, but the boy had been too angry to listen. Now, the memory returned with painful clarity.
The boy sighed. "I think I fed the wrong wolf today," he said softly. The grandfather smiled kindly. "Perhaps," he replied, "but tomorrow you can feed a different one." The boy looked at him. "Is it really that simple?" The old man nodded slowly. "Not always easy," he said, "but always simple." He pointed toward the sky. "Every morning when the sun rises, you are given a new chance, a new moment to choose what kind of person you want to be." The boy felt something warm spread through his chest. For the first time, anger did not feel like an unstoppable force. It felt like something he could learn to guide, something he could understand, something he could choose not to follow.
The wind moved gently through the trees as the grandfather spoke one final time. "Remember this, my child," he said quietly. "The wolves will always be there. But peace does not come from defeating the dark wolf. It comes from feeding the good one more often." The boy nodded slowly. He stood up, looked once more at the quiet forest, and then turned toward home. Tomorrow he would apologize to his friend. Tomorrow he would try again. And somewhere deep inside his heart, the peaceful wolf had just received its very first meal. That night, the boy walked home beneath a sky filled with stars. Inside his heart, he carried the words of his grandfather. "The wolf that wins is the one you feed." From that day forward, the boy began learning how to choose kindness more often. But the struggle of the mind does not belong only to children. Even powerful rulers, even kings who command entire kingdoms, can feel lost inside their own thoughts. And that brings us to our final story tonight, a story about wisdom hidden inside the smallest of objects, a story called The King and the Ring.
Long ago, in a vast kingdom surrounded by golden deserts and distant mountains, there lived a powerful king. His palace was magnificent. Tall marble pillars supported shining ceilings. Gardens filled with fountains and rare flowers stretched across the palace grounds. Servants moved quietly through long corridors, carrying trays of fruit, wine, and silk. To anyone who looked from the outside, the king had everything: power, wealth, respect, a kingdom that obeyed his every command.
Yet inside his heart, the king was never at peace. His mind was always restless. When victory came, he worried it would not last. When difficulties appeared, he feared they would destroy everything he had built. If the harvest was good, he worried about next year's drought. If his army won a battle, he feared another war waiting beyond the horizon. Even during celebrations, when music filled the palace halls and dancers moved under glowing lanterns, the king's thoughts never stopped racing. He could not enjoy happiness fully, and he could not endure hardship calmly. His emotions rose and fell like violent waves in a storm. One day he felt powerful and joyful. The next day he felt anxious and angry. The king began to realize something troubling. Despite ruling an entire kingdom, he could not rule his own mind.
One night, after a long day of court meetings and political disputes, the king walked alone through the quiet halls of the palace. Torches flickered along the walls. Outside, the desert wind whispered softly through the gardens. The king stopped beside a window and looked out into the darkness. "I have conquered lands," he murmured to himself, "but I cannot conquer my worries." The next morning, he made an unusual decision. He summoned the wisest scholars, philosophers, and sages from every corner of his kingdom. When they gathered in the grand hall, the king spoke with unusual seriousness.
"I ask for something very simple," he told them. "Bring me a sentence, a piece of wisdom, something that will help me remain calm in times of great joy and strong in times of great suffering." The hall grew silent. The scholars looked at one another. Some stroked their long beards, others whispered quietly among themselves. The king added one more condition, and the wisdom must be short enough to fit on a ring. The scholars bowed respectfully, but as they left the palace that day, they all carried the same thought in their minds. The king had asked for something far more difficult than it sounded: a single sentence powerful enough to guide a king through every moment of life.
After leaving the palace, the scholars and sages spread across the kingdom in search of the wisdom the king had requested. At first, they believed the task would be simple. After all, these were the wisest men in the land. Many of them had spent decades studying philosophy, religion, and the nature of human life. But the king's request was more difficult than they had imagined. He did not want a long teaching. He did not want a speech. He wanted only one sentence, a sentence powerful enough to calm a king when he was overwhelmed with happiness, and strong enough to comfort him when he was drowning in despair.
Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Some scholars searched through ancient books in dusty libraries. Others traveled to distant temples and monasteries, hoping to find wisdom hidden in old teachings. They gathered many ideas. Some said the sentence should remind the king of his power. Others believed it should remind him of his responsibilities. But none of the phrases seemed to hold the balance the king desired. Some were comforting in times of sorrow, but useless in moments of pride.
Others humbled a man during success, yet offered no strength during suffering. And slowly, the scholars began to realize that the king's question was not simple at all. It was one of the deepest questions a human being could ask.
One evening, while traveling across the desert, a small group of the scholars stopped in a quiet village. There, they heard of an old hermit who possessed a rare and peaceful wisdom. Curiously, the scholars decided to visit him. They found the old man sitting outside his hut, calmly watching the desert wind move across the sand. When they explained the king's request, the hermit listened quietly. Then he opened his eyes and smiled gently. "I believe I know the sentence your king needs," he said. He simply took a small piece of paper and slowly wrote 4 words. Then he folded the paper and handed it to them. "Place these words inside the king's ring," the old man said.
"But tell him something very important." The scholars waited. "These words must only be read when he truly needs them." The scholars returned to the palace as quickly as they could. When they entered the great hall, the king was waiting for them on his throne. His face showed both curiosity and impatience. "Well," the king asked, "have you found the wisdom I asked for?" One of the scholars stepped forward respectfully and bowed. "Yes, your majesty," he said. From a small cloth pouch, he carefully removed the folded piece of paper given to them by the old hermit. The king looked at it with interest. "That is all?" he asked. The scholar nodded. "These words must be placed inside a ring," he explained, "and there is one important instruction." The king leaned forward slightly. "What instruction?" "You must only read these words," the scholar said slowly, "when you truly need them." The king raised an eyebrow. It sounded mysterious.
But he agreed. The royal jeweler was summoned immediately. The tiny sentence was engraved carefully on the inside of a beautiful golden ring, hidden where only the king could see it. When the ring was finished, the king placed it on his finger. At first, nothing changed. Life in the palace continued as it always had. There were victories, there were celebrations, there were festivals filled with music and laughter. And during those joyful moments, the king sometimes remembered the ring, but he did not look at the words. He thought, "I do not need wisdom today. Everything is going well."
Months passed. Then one day, everything changed. News arrived from the northern border. A powerful enemy army had invaded the kingdom. Cities were falling, villages were burning. The king gathered his soldiers and rode into battle, determined to defend his land. But the enemy was stronger than expected. The battle was chaotic and brutal. Soon the king and his remaining soldiers were forced to retreat into the mountains.
Night fell. The king found himself hiding among the rocks, with only a few loyal guards beside him. In the distance, he could see the fires of his captured kingdom glowing in the darkness. His heart was heavy with despair. Everything seemed lost. His crown, his palace, his power, all of it appeared to be slipping away. At that moment, the king remembered the ring. With trembling hands, he turned it slowly on his finger and looked at the tiny words engraved inside. In the faint moonlight, he read the message for the very first time. "This too shall pass." The king stared at the words. At first, they seemed simple, almost too simple. But as he read them again, something inside him began to change.
The message did not promise victory. It did not promise comfort, but it reminded him of something powerful. No moment in life lasts forever. Not success, not failure, not joy, not suffering. Everything moves, everything changes, everything passes. The king closed his eyes and took a slow breath. His fear began to soften. His despair began to loosen its grip. And in the quiet darkness of the mountains, the king felt something return to him. Hope.
The king sat quietly among the rocks, holding the ring close to the faint moonlight. "This too shall pass." The words echoed gently in his mind. For the first time in many years, the king felt a strange calmness. The fear that had filled his heart only moments before began to fade. If defeat could pass, then perhaps victory could return. If darkness could come, then perhaps light would follow. The king straightened his back. His kingdom might be wounded, but it was not gone. And as long as he was alive, the story was not finished. The next morning, he gathered his remaining soldiers. They were tired, frightened, and unsure of what would happen next. But the king's voice was steady. "Do not lose hope," he told them. "Hard times do not last forever." The soldiers saw something new in their king's eyes. Not desperation, not panic, but quiet determination. Slowly, they began to regroup. They traveled through the mountains, gathering allies and loyal warriors who still believed in their king. Villages that had not yet fallen sent men to join the army. Days passed, then weeks, and gradually the king's forces began to grow stronger. Battle by battle, they pushed back the invading army. The enemy that once seemed unstoppable began to retreat.
Finally, one bright morning, the king rode through the gates of his capital city once again. The people cheered loudly. Bells rang across the kingdom. The palace was restored, and celebrations lasted for days. Music filled the halls. Tables overflowed with food and wine. The kingdom was alive with joy. Yet during the greatest celebration, the king quietly looked down at the ring on his finger. He turned it slowly, and once again he read the words engraved inside. "This too shall pass." This time, the meaning felt even deeper, because the message was not only meant for moments of despair, it was meant for moments of triumph as well. Success could fade just as easily as failure. Joy could change just as quickly as sorrow. The king smiled softly. The ring had given him something far more valuable than victory. It had given him balance. From that day forward, the king ruled his kingdom with a calmer heart. When difficult times came, he remembered that they would pass. And when great success arrived, he remained humble, knowing that it too would not last forever. And so the small sentence engraved inside a simple ring became the wisdom that guided an entire kingdom. And so, our journey through these quiet stories comes to an end. A farmer discovered that peace was already inside his breath. A man on the river learned that anger often rises from an empty boat. A young boy realized that every day he chooses which wolf inside his heart will grow stronger. And a king found wisdom in 4 simple words. Words that remind us that every moment in life will eventually pass. Different stories, different lives, yet the same gentle truth. Peace is not something we must chase across the world. Often, it is something waiting quietly inside us, like a calm lake beneath the moon. Now, let your thoughts drift away, like clouds slowly crossing the night sky. Take one slow breath in and breathe out softly. Allow your body to become heavy, warm, and relaxed. The stories may end here, but their quiet wisdom can stay with you, like a small lantern glowing in the dark. Sleep peacefully, and may your mind rest like still water under a silent moan. Good night.